Hi. You probably have a few questions going through your head right now, like, what are you doing with those skulls? Where did they come from? What animals are they? Lucky for you, I have the answers. So these skulls were ethically sourced, which means that they came from animals who had already passed away of natural causes, and we are going to be using them as tools to learn more about physical adaptations. So physical adaptations are characteristics of an animal's body that are going to help them to survive in their environment. And we are going to take a closer look and understand more of the physical adaptations that these two animals here have. I'm not going to tell you what they are right away because I want to give you a chance to guess what they are as we learn more about them. So we're going to start by focusing on this smaller skull here. When we are taking a closer look at animal skulls, there are a few features we really want to pay attention to. So the first feature is going to be the teeth. This particular animal has some flat front teeth. These front teeth are called incisors, and it's actually missing one right here. And then these teeth here, these long pointy ones, are called canines. And then these teeth here, the back teeth that we would call our molars, on an animal, we're going to refer to those as the cheek teeth. So we've got some flat incisors, some long pointy canines, and then the cheek teeth are a little bit pointy, but really they're mostly just bumpy. So if you had to guess, what kind of food do you think this animal might eat? If you guessed meat and plants, you are correct. This animal is an omnivore. If it was an herbivore, it would not have these long pointy canines. And if it was a carnivore, its cheek teeth would be much pointier, more like what the canines look like. The next feature we're going to look at is the nose. So we're going to look at the size of the nose hole and kind of the length of these nasal bones here. So this animal's nose hole and nasal bones are pretty proportional to the size of the rest of the skull, maybe actually a little bit big. And the size can tell us if the animal has a good sense of smell or not. So since it has kind of longer nasal bones and a little bit big nose hole, we're going to say that this animal probably has a pretty good sense of smell. The next thing we want to pay attention to is the eye sockets, which we call the orbits. So that's going to be right here. You kind of have to imagine the back of the orbit on this particular skull and here. So we want to pay attention to the size. If they're big, then that means the animal has good eyesight. If they're really tiny, that means the animal probably doesn't have very good eyesight. And if they're in the middle, then, you know, its eyesight's just fine. Pretty good, not too bad. This animal here, we would probably say their eyesight's pretty good. Its eyes aren't teeny tiny. It looks pretty proportional in comparison to the rest of the skull. We also want to pay attention to the direction that the orbits are facing. So these orbits are pointing forward, and that is going to tell us more about the animal's lifestyle. We have a little rhyme to help us remember this information. Eyes facing front, animal hunts. So an animal that hunts other animals needs to have its eyes facing forward, because having two eyes facing forward gives you depth perception. So we humans, our eyes face forward and we have depth perception. It's what is going to help you figure out how close to you or how far away something is just by looking at it. So when animals with their eyes facing front are looking forward, they don't have to do any additional investigation to kind of see how close or far away things are, which is important if you're a hunting animal, because you need to figure out how fast you need to run or how far you need to jump in order to catch the prey that you're after. The last thing we're going to look at here is these bumps that are on the bottom of the skull. These are called the auditory bullae, and it's the part of the skull that's actually going to hold the parts of the inner ear. So if we look on the outside here, there is actually a hole, and that hole is where the ear leads into, and the inner ear parts are in here. So if these auditory bullae are big and bulgy, then we can tell that the animal has a pretty good sense of hearing. If they are really small and hard for us to see, then the animal probably doesn't have a great sense of hearing. What do you think about this animal's sense of hearing? Do you think it's pretty good or maybe not so good? Yeah, this animal has a pretty good sense of hearing because these auditory bullae are pretty bulgy, pretty easy to see. So, do you have any guesses about what this animal might be yet? I'll give you a little more information and see if you can figure it out. So we've already figured out that this animal is an omnivore. It does eat vegetables, plants, fruits, but it's also going to hunt other animals. It has a decent sense of smell and pretty good hearing. We also can talk about a few things that we're not able to see on the skull here. So this animal has hands that look like ours. They're going to have an opposable thumb, and they like to live in habitats near water usually because some of their favorite foods are things that they can grab out of the water and pick the shells off of, such as crayfish or clams, but they're also going to eat vegetables and fruits and nuts as well. You might also see them in your neighborhood digging through trash cans. This animal has gray fur, and they have a black mask of fur on their face that helps them to see a little bit better. It reduces glare from the sun, and they also have a tail with black stripes. Any guesses what this animal is now? It is a raccoon. Now we're going to focus on this animal here. As you can see, this skull is much bigger than the first skull, so we already know that we're looking at an animal that's bigger than the first one. Just like the first one, we're going to take a look at the teeth. This skull has no incisors on the top jaw, no canines on the top jaw or at all, and its back teeth, or its cheek teeth, are pretty bumpy. They're not very sharp, and they're probably going to be used to grind food down. So what do you think this animal might eat? This animal is an herbivore, so it's only going to eat plants. Now we're going to look at the nose here. So this animal is going to have pretty long nasal bones and a pretty decently sized nasal opening. So what do you think about this animal's sense of smell? Probably pretty good, right? When we look at the orbits, this orbit's closed, so it's a little bit easier for us to really see how big it is. In comparison to the rest of its head, this orbit is pretty big, so this animal probably has pretty good eyesight. And this animal's orbits are facing outwards. They're facing out to the side. So we have a rhyme to help remember that. It's kind of the second part of the rhyme we already learned. Eyes to the front, animal hunts. Eyes to the side, animal hides. So this animal is going to need to hide from predators that might be trying to catch it. Why do you think it would be a good idea to have your eyes on the sides if you're trying to avoid a predator? Basically, it's going to help to give them a bigger field of vision. So they can kind of see in front of them, they can kind of see beside them, they can even kind of see a little bit behind them, so they can kind of see in a lot of directions if a predator is coming and trying to catch them so that they have time to run away. The last thing we're going to look at again is the auditory bullae. That's going to be right here and right here. On this particular skull, they are not quite as big in proportion to the rest of the skull, but we can still kind of see them. So this particular animal is probably going to have all right hearing, maybe not the best, but not the worst. Do we have any guesses what this animal might be so far? I'll give you a little more information to see if we can figure it out. So we already figured out this animal's an herbivore. It's pretty big. It has pretty good sense of smell, pretty good eyesight. It's going to be on the lookout for predators, and it has okay hearing. This animal has brown fur and hooves. They can run really, really fast. They are a mammal. They do live here in North Carolina, and they are an animal that is gonna try to stay hidden if they can. You might see them early in the morning or kind of late in the evening. They are browsers, which means that they have got really strong lips that they're going to use to grab leaves and twigs off of trees to eat. Any idea what this animal is now? It is a white-tailed deer. So just by looking at the skulls of these two animals, we were already able to figure out a lot of information about them, a lot about their lifestyle, and how they are adapted to live in their environment. Next time you see an animal, look at its body and look at the size of the features of its face, and you can start to figure out what about that animal might help it get food or shelter or avoid predators or be a good predator in its environment.